Soccer Today is brought to you by Passion Soccer Boutique for the love of the beautiful game. Always open at passionsoccer.ca. You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And good day. Good night. Welcome to Soccer Today. The Gold Cup concluded last night with the win of the United States. Late drama last night, Duane. First of all, are you surprised that the United States once again wins the Gold Cup?
I know. Hold on. I just got to finish placing my order at the Passion Soccer Boutique for the new Manchester City home kit, though. Just give me 2 seconds to do that. Done. Okay.
Perfect.
No, I'm not upset that you're upset. I'm not confused or surprised that the U.S. won this. I was taking them as the favorite, as many were. For large portions of this tournament, they were at home. Mexico was sending what clearly was a seaside. They seemed to come into their own when they brought the 6 reinforcements in the second part of the tournament, and they were the best team from start to finish throughout this event, and they were full measure last night as well in terms of the 2-1 victory over Jamaica. Jordan Morris, the hero on the night, he was the GOAT, then the GOAT is what I messaged you this morning. So I don't know if he's the greatest of all time, but he certainly was the greatest of the last 3 minutes of the game. We'll say that. And nonetheless, but no, it was as I said, the U.S. was full deserving winners of this tournament. We'll talk maybe in the second segment about whether this tournament is sort of losing the plot a little bit in terms of its oversaturation, and there wasn't a lot of excitement other than the players and a few people on Twitter last night. But people, the U.S. was the full measure for. They are the B Gold Cup deserving champion.
Oh, it's kind of an anticlimactic one. The last Copa America last summer, right? We had that big tournament, and even though we were not involved, Canada was not in that tournament. We still felt like this should be what it's about every 4 years, and not like this year's Gold Cup. So there's that aspect to it, right? There's that aspect of, there's still talks, by the way, with Victor Montaglini, president of CONCACAF, and the CONMEBOL and everybody involved to maybe recreate that experience of having, the Tournament of the Americas. What other name should it have? It's like, it's the Americas tournament. It should be the America.
Yeah, precisely. And I think we'll talk about that in a bit in a little more detail. But certainly, yeah, look, you said Canada wasn't involved in that. And real quickly before we move on to last night again, that's not even the point. It was the opportunity to be involved is almost more exciting than just automatically getting slotted into Gold Cups every 2 years. It's nice when you're there, but there's no build-up to it. There's no anticipation for it. It happens, and then you have fun for a week with it, and then it's gone again for another 2 years. Whereas, if you had a tournament of the Americas, a Copa America, then you would have that anticipation. You'd have that sort of aspiration to it, and I think that would be beneficial to a lot of countries like Canada, like Jamaica, several countries in that vein where they would have that opportunity to try and aspire to get to an event like that. But back to last night. Look, Jamaica did what we thought they were going to do. They were fairly consistently solid. Josie got the goal in the first half. We'll talk about the Blake injury in a minute. That sort of opened things up again. At that point, I thought it was pretty much done because I didn't see much opportunity for Jamaica to create much of anything, and they really weren't. But then out of the blue, they get the draw back in the 50th minute or so, and that set up the dramatic finish. As I said, Jordan Morris. I tweeted out, can we have a conversation with Jordan Morris after the tying goal, because it was clearly his fault. He left his man. The back post was empty. It was just kind of a dreadful performance by he's young. Is Jordan Morris young? He's about 23, right? I don't know.
Yeah, he's still very young. He's 23, 24, I believe now. But yeah, still very young.
Yeah, I suppose he's young by the standards of.
He's young by American soccer prospect standard.
Fair enough. Not as young as the Canadian prospect that we'll talk about in the second segment. But yeah. Anyway, the bottom line is he redeemed himself, and it was a hell of a goal to win a Gold Cup, and it's one that's why I suspect when Jordan Morris's career is over, and I'm on a walker at that point. But when Jordan Morris's career finally does end, that still, even many years later, will be up there amongst his career highlights, because it has to be. You score a goal like that to win a tournament, no matter what the stakes of that tournament are for your country. That's going to be one of your more memorable moments of your career, for sure.
Oh, yeah, it depends if he scores any great goals in the future. Maybe the World Cup at a bigger level even then, but that's something else. But when we look at the United States now, last night, Josie Altidore opened up the goal scoring at the 45th minute. Javon Watson, assisted by Kamara Lawrence, which he was the hero versus Mexico in the semifinal. And then, like you mentioned, Jordan Morris, late in the 80th minute, assisted by Clint Dempsey. Clint Dempsey now tied with Landon Donovan as the best goal scorer ever for the U.S. men's national team. He's bound to break that record in the very near future, coming up probably in a World Cup qualifier. What do you think overall, the entire performance of the United States? We had Clint Dempsey perform at a high level. Josie Altidore, since his arrival in the knockout stage, did perform well, scored a few goals, assisted one. And you have as well other young players like the Dwyers, who just got traded, it's official by the way, to Orlando, and other young players like Kellen Acosta who performed well throughout the tournament. So what is your take overall with the United States?
You have to be impressed with the depth. We talked about them being able to throw Dom Dwyer down back in MLS after, even though he had a great group stage. And as much as we'd like to pump up Alphonso Davies, and we will in the second segment, I think if Dwyer stays or if Josie's there for the whole tournament, we'd probably have been a different conversation about the Golden Boot winner. But we'll put that aside. As I said, Josie, we talked about this in yesterday's, or 2 days ago show. We took the day off yesterday, obviously, for Kevin, but we talked about that 2 days ago, how Josie's probably having his best career, or best season in his career, both club and country, and I think he showed that in the knockout stage. 2 huge goals, 2 powerful goals. He could have had a third one too. I think an early stop by Blake that came off a dipping shot by Josie that ended up having Blake go out with the injury at that point after it. That could have been a goal very well. Probably would have been better for Blake had it been a goal, because he wouldn't have got kicked on the follow through that. Although apparently the X-rays are okay, so Philly fans can breathe a sigh of relief there.
Philly fans can breathe again. But let's talk about Blake for a second. Do you think there's any correlations between the fact that he was subbed off at the 25th minute and didn't finish the game and wasn't there for the majority of the game, and not necessarily the goals, like the goal that were scored, but more like the mentality, more like the confidence factor that Blake does bring to his backline and to his teammate, and how he marshals those players and keeps them organized? Do you think there's a correlation with him missing the majority of the game and Jamaica losing it?
Yeah, this is highly speculative, obviously, but certainly I think if you're going to, I don't think Josie's free kick goal is stopped. I don't. I mean, it's dipping, it's curling away from the keeper. It's a hell of a shot. It's a world class finish that Blake maybe has a 3% chance to stop it, right? Which most keepers have a 0% chance. That's what I'll say about that. So there was, maybe a bit of a factor there, but I think the bigger factor might have been seen not even in defensive marshalling, but rather in the fact that they might not have felt as brave going forward. And if you have a keeper like Blake back there, and you're normally trying to play a compact defensive style, but you have a counter opportunity, you might be free or feel free to sort of get on your foot and go forward and try and create the opportunities when you see those brief chances, and that in turn might have given Jamaica an opportunity to break through and get the winner themselves. But as it was, basically they had been pinned back for about 40 minutes by the time the goal went in. After Jamaica tied it, did they have another look on goal? I'd have to go look at the stats, but it certainly didn't seem so at the time. It was pretty much one-way traffic. It seemed kind of inevitable. Jamaica kind of was playing for penalties, I think, for probably about the 75th minute on, and it was inevitable when it went in. The only question really was whether it was going to happen in regular time or whether they would have to go into that extra 13 minutes. And I think Jamaica really would have suffered in the 30 minutes had it continued any further.
Yeah, that's a good point. But when we now look at the entire Gold Cup, yes, it's the Gold Cup. It's like the winner gets a chance to maybe in the playoff, but it's the United States.
Maybe.
It doesn't really matter now, right? So, look, now the Gold Cup, does it say anything about CONCACAF? We have some surprises. Canada performed fairly well in the group stage. We have as well Honduras not performing well, going through to the knockout stage because of the help of French Guyana and that now famous or more infamous disqualification of their second game. So what do you take from this Gold Cup in the CONCACAF hierarchy? Does it say anything? Did Canada gain something? Did Honduras lose something? Did Panama and Costa Rica confirm their form? What are you taking? Could we do a power ranking with the results of this Gold Cup?
I think other than Jamaica obviously making a final again, and doing so in a way that was unexpected in terms of their defensive organization and solid keeping, which we did expect, that their defensive organization was something that was a little different from them in the past. You can sort of look at that and say that might be something that they can build upon. I think El Salvador and Canada, both those two countries, can take some stock. The non-Hex teams that performed well is basically what I'm saying here. The Hex teams, I don't think you can really draw much to in. Part of that is because they didn't bring their full lineups, which again then cycles back to say, what does that really mean against the non-Hex teams, right? So, from a Canadian perspective, and we've talked about this already, you want to be cautiously optimistic about the performance because in the past they had these situations before and they couldn't even take advantage of those. So the fact that they were able to this time, I think, is something that you want to at least be positive about, but you don't want to get overly sold on the idea that this means the corner has been turned. Obviously, it is not. In terms of the overall Gold Cup, as I said, look, I think that it does demonstrate, and we've known this for a while, that across CONCACAF there is a bit of an overall improvement in the whole region that I think makes it a little bit more challenging for the two big boys. 2.5 big boys, we'll call Costa Rica half in this case, to necessarily go deep into these tournaments automatically. But in the end, 3 of the 4 semifinalists were the 3 big boys, right? The 2.5 big boys, however you want to put that. So how much has changed? It's going to be a while yet before we truly see other sides stand up. And the other complication for this, and the one thing that I think is more troubling is kind of a subtle thing when you're looking at the overall region gap, and that is the fact that the 2 non-FIFA nations qualify. And this is consistent with the non-FIFA nations qualify, which tells you a little bit about the overall strength of the Caribbean region, that these countries that aren't even countries in terms of FIFA managed to get in, which means when you're talking about World Cup depth, there's no gain there. And I think it's time, and I don't know how you do this politically because these countries are CONCACAF members and they have votes, and Victor and everyone else has to sort of appease them. But I think it's time to either encourage these countries, Guadeloupe, Martinique, French Guyana, all of them, there's 3 more out there, to get into either, or get off the pot, to go to FIFA or not come to CONCACAF anymore, because you're either going to strengthen the region or you're going to continue to sort of hold it back, because you're taking away the opportunity for countries like Haiti to participate in this and try and build upon stuff. And when you're taking a spot from them, if you're not actually going to enhance the region on a FIFA level. I
agree, but they have to change their political system, basically. For
well, no, they don't, because Puerto Rico has full FIFA membership. Like, there's countries out there that are I forget what they call them politically speaking, but you don't necessarily have to be fully independent to have a FIFA recognition. You just have to meet certain football standards and be willing to have your players only eligible to play for you. So you don't have to, you don't have to become full nation states. You can still participate in FIFA as a.
Okay, so basically what they have to do, example of French Guyana specifically in Martinique, they have to go to the French Football Federation and be like, you know what? We're separating. We're not going to be. Our best players won't go play for you anymore. How about that? And then that's the way it starts, right?
Yeah, well, that's what you're doing. What you're giving up is you're giving up the opportunity for a potential Maluda, for a one-off generational player to have the opportunity to represent a really big country, in exchange for having multiple players within your nation, within your country, represent you on a smaller stage. So that's kind of what you're giving up. But I think you're not even really giving that up, because I'll tell you what, if France wanted Malouda back in the day, I'm sure there were, because Algeria has full nation status in FIFA, and they still managed to get, Zidane. So they would find their ways. They would find connections back to the home country, just like everyone else does right now in the world, where there's, the passports can be quite liquid sometimes if they want a player for a large country wants a player. So I don't think you're even really giving that much up. I think you're just giving opportunity to your your players that aren't necessarily in that position. And I think it is the answer moving forward for these countries. Because look, obviously Guadeloupe got to the semifinal. Martinique has gone pretty deep in this tournament before. French Guiana, they showed some stuff in there. There's something for these teams to bring, and they're qualified. They're going through the Caribbean Cup to get there, and which means they're finishing top 4 in the Caribbean consistently. Martinique is. Consistently, Guadeloupe wasn't there this time, but they have consistently in the past, and French Guiana got there this time. So, there's skill there. So why don't they deserve to go to a World Cup qualifying? Why don't those players have that opportunity? And if that means that a player that goes on to choose to play for France can't represent them, then, well, that's a choice they have to make at some point in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk about the individual awards from the Gold Cup, but especially our Canadian Golden Boot.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Soccer Today is brought to you by Passion Soccer Boutique, Vaudreuil, Laval, Saint-Léonard, and always open everywhere at passionsoccer.ca. Duane, one thing we were not expecting after the group stage, we were all surprised by Alphonso Davies' 3 goals tally in the group stage. We're like, come on, somebody's going to score more. But guess what? They haven't. And our very own Alphonso Davies, Golden Boot of the 2017 CONCACAF Gold Cup.
And he wins it based on the fact that he had a couple more assists as well. So there were a couple players tied at 3, but he had the most assists of those players tied at 3. So, yeah, big stuff for a young kid. Going to get the headlines up here. I don't want to crap on the parade. I mentioned already that had the U.S. had their main guys there the whole time, and Mexico the same thing, maybe not, but who cares, really?
Yeah, because they didn't. Exactly. They didn't. It's Alphonso Davies winning the Golden Boot, starting 11 of the tournament, and as well, best young player of this Gold Cup. I'm floored. It's what else? At least we got something. We got something. Canada has got something out of a Gold Cup. I'm floored.
Well, it's the first time since 2003 that they got something out of a Gold Cup. They won the bronze medal in 2003 when there was a third place game. I don't like that they got rid of the third place game. I know that the U.S. was all pissy about the fact they had to play in it last time, and I get a little irritated at American fans with short memories about how they're above and beyond stuff like that, because having a third place game is something for smaller countries to aspire to. But we'll leave that alone for now. At any rate,
Duane, there's only one way usually to finish the tournament with the victory in a high note, and that's the tournament, like a trophy winner. So having a third place game is kind of fun because you're winning off. You're winning to finish your tournament, and you kind of finish like, oh well, at least I got this, and it's kind of at least go happy feeling. And it's like the bronze in the Olympic. If it's a judo sport or something where if you win the bronze, you're happy. You won something on your way out. You didn't Oh, it's kind of interesting at that point.
You win gold, you win bronze, you lose silver. Yeah. That's the old adage there. Let's have 5 rings coming out here. I like third place games. I know a lot of people out there in this current generation it's not generational in terms of age, but this generation of sports seems to think that there's no value in anything other than first. Second is your first place loser or whatever the hell that crap saying is. It's a load of crap in my mind. At any rate, we'll move on from that. I completely got aside here, but yeah, Davies. Obviously, at 16, to win this award regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the tournament, is remarkable. The Young Player Award is as significant to me as the Golden Boot. The Golden Boot's a statistical-based award, and it's nice to get that. And, a couple goals against French Guyana pushed him over the top there, and certainly what a debut there. I think the goal against Costa Rica remains my favorite moment of the Gold Cup from a personal level because it was so unexpected, and he continued that. We saw his form dip a little bit, I think, as sort of the strain of playing an international tournament at 16 caught up to him a little bit, but that's to be expected. And the fact that he, experienced that is going to benefit everyone moving forward in terms of the next Gold Cup and hopefully the next whatever cup, fill it in there, because Alphonso Davies is going to be around in 2026 and in 2022, and hopefully Canada can have some moments at a higher level sometime in there. So yeah, it's good stuff, and it's good stuff that you can be about as a Canadian. For Carlos Corazon is the other guy that won the Gold Boot for Canada, by the way. If you haven't heard that by now, he was, of course, the hero of the 2000 run, which is a much different story because Carlos Corazon was League Two player, I believe, at the time, completely out of the blue, had a hot streak in that tournament, scored a goal in the final, scored a goal in the semifinal, the winning goal there as well. So he had a well-deserving Golden Boot experience there,
but then disappeared off the face of the earth.
Exactly.
Like a lot. Like we've seen this happen many times, and we hope that Davies is not one of them, right?
Yes. Sorry, Kevin, I lost you there for a second. Could you repeat that?
I was just saying, and the one who won the Golden Boot for Canada in 2000 then disappeared off the face of the earth, and we hope that doesn't happen with Davies. We've seen it happen before. Highly touted prospects, but is he a prospect or has he arrived? That's kind of the question now with Davies is, how long do you call a kid a prospect when he's playing?
Well, he's a full professional at 16 years of age. Like this is I think that a lot of most Canadians that are listening to this understand this, but I think a lot of casual soccer fans that have sort of began to heard of Alphonso Davies, and there are a lot of those out there, and that's one of the key things that this kid is doing for Canadian soccer is he's making sort of, hockey fans and football fans and basketball fans that are, open to the idea of soccer, but not necessarily in it day in, day out, stand up and go notice. Oh, what's this kid here? He's the best Canadian player ever, which he isn't yet, but certainly it's something that gets their attention. Yeah, it's an international story. This is what I'm talking about. Like he's being noticed around the world. A 16-year-old wins a Golden Boot at a continental championship. I don't care whether it's the Gold Cup and it's the B Gold Cup or whatever. Yeah, we get the quality level, but outside of these borders, people are just going to look at it and go, he's 16 and he won the Gold Boot at a Confederations Championship for a country that isn't really that well known within the sport.
And didn't play the semis or the final, stopped playing in the quarters. So yeah, only played 4 games at the tournament, not 6.
Yeah, they're going to take note of that, and they're going to say, interesting. And that's going to make big clubs, very big clubs, take note. And do not be surprised if Alphonso Davies signs for a very big name. That does not necessarily mean that he will play for that very big name immediately. In fact, he probably won't. But do not be surprised if he signs for a very big name, and that's going to create I'm not sure if the Voyageurs crowd will be able to handle that day. Take your heart medication, boys and girls. But yeah, it's going to be a good day. And look, we need stars like this. This is my lament, and I'm going to go way back here now, and I'm going to talk about my dear friend Owen. And one of my biggest laments, and I didn't have a podcast at the time, I just was ranting at boards, like everyone else. Media guy was talking on the Voyageurs board about this. One of my biggest frustrations about Owen Hargreaves and his decision to go to England is because where he was playing at the time, and even though he was the type of player that was never going to score a boatload of goals, obviously didn't. He was kind of a player that not everyone in this country necessarily at that time would have understood his role, because they just would have thought stars are players that scored or that created, or even defended in a more traditional way. And this idea of kind of a mopping up middle six guy was not something that was really well known. But where he played, the badge he was wearing, and this kills me to say this because you know who I support in England, but he was playing for Manchester freaking United. And the potential he could have had to grow this sport and to build this sport and to put this sport on the map back in the early 2000s was so immense because of that very factor. Even if you were under a rock and were one of those guys that made fun of those diving European soccer players all the time, you know who Manchester United is. You know who Bayern Munich is, the other team that he played for. He eventually played for City, but I like to forget about that. At any rate, you forget about these, you know these things, and you can drive the sport forward. And I think Alphonso Davies signing for a big club like that will have such immense potential to grab that casual fan. And that's why I'm really cheering for this kid to continue that upward trajectory, because it's really quite remarkable to see. And it's just great that he's decided to support or to represent Canada in here, because he did have options, obviously. The options weren't as spectacular as maybe other,
it wasn't just like Ivory Coast for Baloo, let's face it. So
yeah.
And speaking of Baloo, though, it's kind of interesting because the two are not that are linked, but they're similar stories, right? They're young kids breaking through the starting 11, breaking through their first team with their club, having some playing minutes. And Baloo did represent Canada at the under 19, under 20 levels, depending on which tournament it was. And you do have that option of like Baloo, Ivory Coast, and apparently Chelsea already has an eye on him. That's in the words of Didier Drogba, might have told Chelsea to keep an eye on the young Baloo Tabla. But yeah, it is interesting to see how Davies, his progression, how it continues. It's been, well, astronomical last 12 months.
Yeah.
So where is it going to be? You want it to stabilize a bit, and him to continue to, well, with the hard work and the, quote unquote the grind, learn the intricacies of adding more stuff to his game, because his game is at a certain level for a 16-year-old is quite impressive, and he does have a freedom, like a looseness to his play. But then eventually tactics will be introduced, role and will be introduced. Yes, he will probably be the one being more free in the team and up top and all that, but still you have a certain sense of responsibility that will be added to his play, and it will be his reaction to having a bigger role with the team, literally in the tactic department, that will give us an idea of his true potential.
Yeah, and look, exactly, and he's going to, nothing against Carl Robinson and the MLS system there, but I think the next stage of his development is to get exposed to something somewhere else, and that's not necessarily saying, again, that Vancouver's doing anything wrong. It's just that it's for a player that age to try and expand the different ways that you look at the game and get out of a single system, I think benefits your game. Real quickly, though, you mentioned Baloo, and you mentioned them being kind of linked a little bit in people's minds. And I think they are, because of the two young players that both had dual national potentials and et cetera, et cetera. I think that Davis' success and the success of all of the young players at the Gold Cup really make it more likely that a player like Blue may choose to stay in Canada, may choose to represent Canada. Obviously, Ivory Coast is going to be a damn tempting thing for him, and his family influence seems to be pointing that way. But he's played with these guys before. He's seen the success that they've had. They're beginning to have. They're contemporaries. He knows he's going to step in and immediately play. He looks at 2026 when that comes, and I think it will. And he knows that there is going to be a World Cup chance for him. Like, there's actually, if Canada gets awarded the 2026 World Cup, this sounds weird to say, but that's a greater percentage possibility of him playing in a World Cup than Ivory Coast, because he'd have to make Ivory Coast, and Ivory Coast would have to qualify. It's not as easy in Africa, right? So he would actually have a sure thing World Cup so long as he stayed healthy and continued to develop in the same way, versus all those sort of speculation. And then I think on the other side of things, we're talking about young players here. I think that the success of the young kids and the success of Davies might enhance some of the key veterans on the Canadian national team scene to stick around for another cycle. I think Atiba could still have a role for another cycle, and maybe he looks at this Gold Cup and he goes, yeah, you know what, I can come back and play a bit more, especially if he eventually moves back to MLS, which we all think he might at one point. So he may stick around for another cycle, and you may see him stay a little while, and I think that benefits the whole system as well. So all in all, I think it was a very positive, obviously, it was a very positive experience for all of us in Canada for this Gold Cup, and it's why it's kind of been hard for me to wrap my head around everyone moaning about how bad the Gold Cup was, just because I watched it and went, oh, well, this seemed a lot better than the last few for me.
Well, yeah, it was. And that's how I think we need to approach this Gold Cup. Well, not approach, but to look at it with hindsight is, well, it was maybe the first positive stepping stone and the first Zambrano stamped team where you actually had that feeling of a team. You had that feeling of players giving that second and third effort, really working for that Maple Leaf. So, something that like a team that's not beaten before they're taking the field, right? That's all we asked for, and we kind of got it this time around, and that was a pleasure to watch. I have to say, I had pleasure watching Canada play soccer, Duane.
Exactly. And look, one final thought on this, Kevin, is that we saw Jamaica do very well, obviously, and there's a lot of Jamaicans, or Jamaican Canadians, Canadians of Jamaican descent living in Toronto that are going to be very interested to continue to support their national team at BMO Field in September. I'm not saying that they don't have the right to do that, and I'm not suggesting that we should, be angry at them for doing that. But what I am suggesting is that we as Canadians that support the Canadian national team that live in the Toronto area or live close enough to the Toronto area to get there should go buy tickets now for that September friendly, so that at the very least we have equal representation in there, so that the Canadian boys that did so well in the Gold Cup feel just as much support as Jamaica will that day.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Duane, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, some bits and bytes. The bits and bytes on Soccer Today. And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane, a few news broke since last show on Tuesday. Dom Dwyer going to Orlando. Now it's official for a record deal in Major League Soccer for a Major League Soccer player. Do you think the advent of TAM and GAM over the last 12 to 18 months is going to facilitate trades in the league? And are we going to see more big blockbuster trade like Dom Dwyer arriving with thousands of people waiting for him at the Orlando International Airport?
I don't know if we're going to necessarily see a scene like we saw at the Orlando International Airport again, because they have a bit of a unique sort of relationship with each other, Dom Dwyer and the Orlando fans, that might not necessarily translate to every trade like this. But certainly, there's been a couple conflicting sort of articles about this. There's one article out there that Paul from 442, our friend Paul, he wrote that sort of suggested that TAM and GAM and GMs learning how to use this in an effective way may result into a greater amount of blockbuster trades. And I think even you might see that concept of loans, of rentals, as we call them in other sports, happening more in Major League Soccer with GAM and TAM out there. So, you have a team that's maybe a player short in their mind from being a championship contending team for a playoff run, giving a whole bunch of GAM TAM up to someone for a star player. That's on their final year of a contract, right? Like you see that in all the other North American sports. That's a very traditional thing that most North American fans can understand. And there's some logic about that, because GAM TAM is a future thing. It's like trading a AA prospect in baseball for a starting pitcher, something we're very used to in North America. I think most fans here could understand that. I'm going to give you $1 million right now, which is going to affect my ability to do stuff 2 years from now, but I'm also going to get this star player that might give me a championship this year. You might see more of that. But there's another article that I read the other day that suggests that the Dwyer trade illustrates what they call, quote unquote, MLS's selling problem. And this is because the teams, there's interest in these players to go elsewhere. And in Dwyer's case, he has an English passport. So he was born in England. So obviously he has an English passport. He's American international now, but he has the opportunity to play in England without a work permit. So there is interest there apparently, but for them to sell him there, they're willingly, or Kansas I'm talking about, they're willingly giving up a lot of money because of the way MLS sort of keeps a lot of that thing and forces them to spend allocation in a certain way. So really the best option from an SKC perspective was this deal. It gives them so much money that they can use in so many good ways. And it is, I think, a very good deal for Kansas City if they can find a replacement to even represent 80% of his output for the rest of the season. And I think Kansas City ultimately has done a very nice piece of business here. But as this article suggested, it kind of screws the player a little bit too. And I think that they might be something that they have to address, because maybe Dwyer wanted to go to, I don't know, West Ham, whatever. I'm pulling that name out of my ear. Maybe he, or wherever, what comes in there. And maybe they were offering $3 million, but that's not going to work. Even though it's more money on paper than what they got through this deal, it's less money that they can spend. And that's kind of something that they're going to need to address, unless they don't want to, because if they don't, they may not want to, because they may want to encourage their teams to keep those players in MLS. but I'm not sure the players are going to be as happy with that.
Yeah, it's interesting situation. But yeah, Dom Dwyer going to Orlando. What does it say now for Kansas City? Kansas City has a potential kind of a great run lurking, especially in front of them. So maybe they're gonna go get that piece like you're talking about that will propel them to be maybe a contender for the Western Conference if things continue this way. Are you expecting Kansas City to make a big move in the next 2 weeks?
I think that you have to think that Kansas City had been planning for life without Dwyer already. Most MLS teams, most successful MLS teams, plan a year ahead all the time anyway. So, and they looked at his contract situation. They offered him, I think, $1.25 million is what the rumor is. He turned that down. So they had to say, okay, we're losing him in 2018 anyway. They've decided to speed that up. So I think that they have a target in mind. It's whether or not that they can finish whatever deal that they had in mind for that target in this window is the question. And since they have, I believe they do have someone in mind. I think that there's a good chance that they will bring someone in some capacity with the idea of making up for the lack of production that they just moved away. They're clearly a contending team right now. So it'd be silly of them to just throw away all of these goals, particularly when that really, outside of Dwyer, there's not a lot there that you can point to and say that that's going to be the player that's going to step up and do it without a plan in place. And if Kansas City turns around next week and brings in a signing of equal sort of resume as Dwyer, then I think maybe there's going to be risk to it because it's going to be likely coming in from outside MLS. And there's always risk when you bring a player in from outside MLS. But if they bring someone in who has a resume that's similar to Dwyer's or maybe even a little bit better than Dwyer's and you think has the potential to match his production, then you have to look at this and go, hey, good play, Peter. Good play. Clap.
Yeah, especially, and if he brings someone that his value is greater than Dwyer, and maybe the actual cost is lower, then they would have done a great deal of business in a salary cap league. Let's not forget, it's not personal, it's business, and you have to make your roster fit that salary cap. So I think it does make a lot of sense for Kansas City in a long-term mentality to look, we have the opportunity. Orlando apparently is the one that facilitated at the beginning of the talks, and Kansas City turned around, look at their papers, look at everything like, yeah, maybe it's time to pull that trigger. So far, we'll see how Orlando plays with Dwyer in the next few months, and what does it say for Laramee and everything else, we'll see. But for Kansas City, depending of their next move, it could be a good one. If they're just turning around, not making any roster move and keeping full value for next transfer window, then we'll have to wait and judge.
Yeah, look, all the risk is on Orlando in this deal. They have given up an outrageous amount of money for Major League Soccer. Ham and Gam, for as much as people make fun of monopoly money, is key to your ability to build a roster. It's vital. And for them to give up that much, they have to – I think that they know that they're selling Lauren. I think that that's what it comes down to. And if that's the case, then maybe they're going to move Lauren out in this window, although the suggestion is it will probably be January because they'll get more back at that point. So that has to be what they're thinking. In fact, if you read the 442 article, it suggests right in it that they don't even have the money to cover it right now. That they're promising something they don't have yet. But so that means that they're, and the league's not going to approve that deal unless they're reassured that they're going to have assets that aren't literally there right now. So
and that would suggest to me too, Duane, that maybe there's actually probably potentially already a deal, like maybe a shaking of hands already on Cal Larin for January with potentially maybe an English club like we speculated before.
Or a German club. I think you're going to see Kyle land in either England or Germany. There's some Canadians out there that believe that Kyle Larin's quote-unquote form has dropped him to the point that he's going to end up in like League One in England or some minor team league in Europe. That's really not the case. We'll just leave it at that. He's going to be just fine. He will sign for a club that is playing in a top league. Don't worry about that. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right that MLS is, again, not going to approve a deal for assets that aren't there on paper right now unless they're damn convinced that the assets are going to be there on paper, which means they are on paper, they're just not on paper publicly yet. right? So that's not that the allocation is ever totally public, but you know what I mean. So yes, I would suggest that there is either a deal in place in principle for January or a deal in place that will go through in the next couple of weeks for Laram. But to get back to the actual Dwyer thing, the risk that Orlando's playing right now is pretty significant. Now, you would have to think that they've spoken to the Dwyer people and have at least a pretty strong indication that he's willing to re-sign with them. And you would have to think that that would likely mean that he's going to be offered a DP level contract for them. Now, is Dom Dwyer a DP level player? If you look at his production over the last couple of years, certainly he would fit in that mold in the same way that Wondolowski sort of earned his DP contract through his MLS play. The same way that the only way that they're keeping Lauren is with a DP contract, which I don't think Lauren has that as a condition, but that would be one way that they might be able to. So yeah, he kind of fits there, but you know, I don't know whether he's necessarily the vision of what you would think of as a DP. And the only place that he might make sense as a DP in the whole picture is in Orlando, where, as we saw at the airport, and this is why the airport matters, he does have that kind of pull within the community. He does have that kind of good feeling that the supporters have about him. Now, that's the one fear I have about it. And this is kind of the image that I had was you know, TFC fans giving Julian de Guzman a standing ovation as he trained at halftime right after he had signed for them for the first time before he was even on the pitch to play for them. We all know how that turned out. You can't make deals with sentimentality as your main focus. And my only worry, and I'm not saying that Orlando is doing it out of sentimentality, but there's potential of that. Jason Price doesn't strike me as someone who's going to accept the idea that we're making sentimental signings for no other reason. But nonetheless, there's a lot of risk there. And if Dwyer does, if they can't get a contract done and Dwyer flies the coop and signs as a free, oh man, that's going to come down. It's going to go down in the, you know, into the history books as one of the worst trades in the history of Major League Soccer if he leaves there on a free and they don't do anything this year.
Another quick topic I wanted to talk to you about during the Bits and Bytes, Duane. It was announced on BC Place's Twitter yesterday that the Women's World Cup revenue generated in the Vancouver region with games at BC Place and the final are to the likes of $118 million that they can prove directly because of the Women's World Cup. And they say that the big winner of the World Cup was the province of British Columbia, with revenues and taxes generated because of those the reason of the Women's World Cup. So finally, we kind of have like proof and numbers to back the idea of, look, sometimes big events is worth the cost of production.
Isn't there an old adage about how statistics can prove out anything if you try hard enough?
True, true.
Yeah, you know what? This is what I'm going to say about that. And this is a Five Rings topic that we've had many, many times. The real winner of the World Cup were the hundreds of thousands of young boys and girls in this country that were inspired to be active and take up soccer or any sport and just aspire to represent Canada, aspire for young girls that are inspired by their heroes. That's the real winner of the World Cup, regardless of economic figures. And anytime sports people try and throw these economic studies into things, I think they just muddy the water. That's kind of where I go with that. Yeah, I think there's economic spin-off for sure. But to be able to prove exactly what that is complicated. And I think that we would all be better off if we tried to push this idea of inspiration and tried to sell people on the idea that not everything you spend money on has to have a financial return. This isn't the stock market. Sometimes inspiring generations, inspiring kids is worth some money out. Governments don't have to just sit back and pave roads, you know. That's kind of where I go down with that. But if they could prove it, and I'm sure that the bars and restaurants, like I was in Montreal for the World Cup, and I saw how many people came in for those games and how much, you know, action there was, how much buzz there was in the city or around the stadium, how exciting it was to be part of that. It's one of, you know, I'm going to remember that day that I was in Montreal for the World Cup, the Women's World Cup, to the day I die. It was a great day. International scenes around there. You're meeting people from all over the world. It was really worthwhile. And it really makes me excited to hopefully, knock on wood, be alive in 2026 to experience the same thing in my own backyard again, because it was really a remarkable day. And that's the real winner of the World Cup.
Now, as well, it was announced yesterday that Bastian Schweinsteiger will be the captain of the All-Star game next week. And The reason I'm talking about the All-Star game next week is because I'll be present at the All-Star game next week with special coverage. Follow me on social media at Kev Laramee on Twitter, facebook.com/Kev Laramee as well for special video coverage, special audio coverage. We'll meet up with some journalists that we usually have on the show. We'll do some videos with them. We'll discover Chicago together and that and much more next week. Follow me on everywhere, Duane. So I'm kind of getting excited now to go into Chicago on Monday.
It's a good party, Kevin. It's a fun time. The game, I don't know. We'll see. You're gonna maybe get to.
The best way I heard somebody describe it this week, I think it wasn't one of the players that is having a good season in Major League Soccer. Like, it's kind of more of a celebrity game than an All-Star game. And yeah, it's kind of true, especially when you're going to be facing Real Madrid. But hey, at least I can say that once in my life, I will have seen Cristiano Ronaldo play live.
It's Miram that said that, yeah, because he was left off, which is absurd. Victor Vasquez not being on the roster is absurd. There's a lot of absurdities to the roster, but you got to just roll with it. That's why I don't really give it much thought from the game. And any analysis that we bring from that goal, what you're going to gain from being there, Kevin, isn't going to be watching Real Madrid. It's going to be fun. You'll enjoy it. I've seen Real Madrid live. It is surreal to see Cristiano Ronaldo 10 feet from you. David Beckham 10 feet from the same deal.
I'm looking forward to the press conference because I doubt we'll have the opportunity to do a scrum with Cristiano Ronaldo. If we do, man, that's like bucket list type of event. But I'm pretty sure there's going to be a press conference at least with Ronaldo behind a microphone.
Yeah, I did have the opportunity to. We didn't get it. We didn't have an opportunity to speak to Ronaldo when he was in Toronto. But I did have in my career the opportunity to be in a scrum with David Beckham, and I can still picture it. It is one of the most surreal moments of your life when you were standing away 10 feet away, or in my case, it was 3 feet away from quite likely one of the top 10 most famous people on the planet. It's weird. I don't want to, I'm not cynical about it. It's like, and I'm not a Beckham fan by any means. He played for United, for God's sakes, but you're still going, oh my God, that's David Beckham. But he's right there. I could poke him.
No, yeah. They have a certain aura of them too, right? It's today's royalty. No, it's today's royalty. And next week, I'm going to literally brush shoulders with the royalty of Real Madrid.
Yeah, I when I saw Ronaldo, it was the closest I got to him was about 25 feet away because I was at the open practice and he was on the pitch about 25 feet away. And what I'll say is that most times when you see a celebrity, and because I've worked in newspapers and that, I've had the opportunity to meet a few here and there. I'm not trying to brag about that. They're just flesh and blood. But nonetheless, when you meet a celebrity, they usually seem smaller. That's the first thing you'll say. David Beckham certainly seemed much smaller when you saw him in person. But Ronaldo, he did not. He was big in every way. He just was a guy that just had an aura about him that was incredible. And that was from 25 feet away when he was on the pitch. So I can't even imagine what he'd be like walking down the street. He's bigger life and personality. It'll be fun that way. Also, the other thing you're going to get from it, look, Evan, is that a lot of business happens. And the business happens not necessarily through email and that. It happens, over a pint, over a conversation at the bar. So I know you're not the biggest drinker, but I suggest that maybe what you'll do, Kevin, is you should go sit at the hotel bar, order a virgin rum and coke in a rocks glass so it looks like you're drinking, and sit there and sit and listen for a while.
All right, that's what I'll do on starting Monday. So we'll see for next week's schedule how we are able to pull it off. Monday I'll be traveling, so we'll see how me and Duane can find ways to hook up and do some soccer today. For tomorrow as well, closer to 11 probably than 10. But you can follow our Twitter to make sure you never miss a live show at Soccer Today SPN, for the Shell Network at sportspod.net, and you can find Duane at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. For Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee, and as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com. Soccer Today was brought to you by Passion Soccer Boutique. Visit us at Vaudreuil, Laval, Saint-Léonard, and always open and everywhere at passionsoccer.ca.